Part 6. Sacred Ceremony. You need none of this. Everything I've discussed up to this point has been provided to give you an orientation to the philosophy and spirituality I have come to know. If you were to stop here, it would be enough. Remember, following the specific traditions of a particular people is not what this quote-unquote way is all about. I choose to participate in ceremony as I'm able, to keep me grounded in something I feel comfortable with. You may not. The community of people that have these traditions in common interest may not be fulfilling to you. What's in your heart and how you feel you must walk your road is entirely up to you. You need none of this. Remember, too, that this is not an easy way. Once you've chosen it, it may take more commitment and more sacrifice than you have to give. These ceremonies are intended to test and challenge you both spiritually and physically. Unlike other spiritualities, you're actually expected to do certain things that will virtually force you on your way, and you may suffer in your endeavor. I don't tell you this to frighten you. You should know that I've met perhaps hundreds of people that have chosen this spirituality that find nothing more challenging and fulfilling. Even if they've only participated casually, they walk away with a feeling of accomplishment and gratification. There's a key point to be made here, though. Do not participate in any of these ceremonies without the utmost respect for them. If all you have is curiosity, respect the participants' and providers' commitment to this way. Never force or convince someone to participate that has no interest or respect. Participation should occur exclusively as the result of a free will choice with sincerity. The simplest of starts. If you choose not to participate in a ceremony that's conducted by any particular group, or you don't have access to one, you have another option, and it's a simple one. Obtain a small leather pouch of all natural materials, and some plain unscented tobacco. If possible, obtain a bundle of sage. My tradition calls for northern plain sage, but I've seen other varieties used. You may also be comfortable using flat cedar. Smudge the bag by burning or smoldering some of the sage in a small pot or shell and passing it through the smoke. Smudge the tobacco as you put it into the bag. Draw the string and carry the bag with you for a time. How long is up to you. At a full moon or during a new moon, preferably at dusk, moonrise on a full moon, find a spot outside that makes you feel good. It doesn't matter where. Face west and open your pouch. Take a pinch and hold it up to the west, then scatter it before you gently. As you do, pray for understanding. Pray that you come to have a clear understanding of the things you need in your life. Before you turn, say all my relations. Turn towards the north. Offer a pinch of tobacco. Pray for strength. Pray that you have the strength to do the things you need to in your life. Say all my relations. Turn to the east. Offer a pinch. Pray for knowledge. Pray that you come to know all the things that you need to in your life. Say all my relations. Turn towards the south. The south is the source of life and health. It's the place your ancestors have gone when they were done here. Pray that you will have all the time you need on this earth to do the things you need to do and the health you need to get them done. Offer a pinch. Say all my relations. As you do all this, keep two things in mind. First, remember that you do not ask these things for yourself. All that you ask and all that you need is for the sake of others. Even those things that you need to make you strong, you gain to give away. Take care not to ask for anything specific or for more than you need. Merely ask for guidance in finding your way. Second, be thankful for what you have, no matter how sparse or abundant. Keep it foremost in your mind that you have what you have for the sake of others. Ask for nothing more than what you need to find fulfillment. Your spirit helpers, your Tunkashala, will hear your cries and your prayers. If you've made this simple offering in a humble way, with a sincere heart, they will show you your way. Be patient. This little private ceremony is one that has crept into my personal tradition over a long period of time. It's merely a suggestion. It's what I've learned as a basic personal prayer. I wish I did it more often. Use it or discard it as you see fit. Yuwipi ceremony. I've attended only about 2 Yuwipi ceremonies in my quote-unquote tenure walking this way. One was a very formal and crowded occasion at a Sundance in Colorado in 1990. The other was a ceremony that was quite casual, which replaced a sweat lodge that was made impractical by a winter storm. I'll discuss the Sundance later, but the Yuwipi ceremony in Colorado took place in a teepee. It was called to help bring the people together during the sacred Sundance. The Yuwipi generally takes place as an act of, quote, community healing, unquote, and many people can attend. Although the teepee was quite large, we were pressed in like sardines. I won't discuss the specifics of the Yuwipi since I don't have the quote-unquote authority or experience to do so. What I will do is tell you that the participation of, quote, the common people, unquote, is generally that of the spectator. The medicine person will call upon the spirits and all will pray to come together as one. There was a carefully prepared altar, the sacred accoutrements of the medicine man and his wife, or half-side as spouses are called in this way, and they sat in a place of honor. Most of this took place in total darkness and was quite mystical and rather fun. This medicine person helped guide the people to a point at which they could find the road to healing, mutual fulfillment, and then lend that strength to the Sundancers. The second Yuwipi I attended was very relaxed and took place in the living room of one of my pipe carrier friends. We were discouraged from attempting sweat lodge ceremony due to the weather. We relaxed together and prayed and passed the pipe, and that was that. It's my understanding that the Yuwipi is quote-unquote performed for a wide variety of reasons and in any number of ways. Again, it's a reflection of the Red Road's emphasis on the individuation of spirituality. Generally, you might loosely associate this ceremony with the idea of attending church. The way I see it, as communities of people that have this road in common grow and come together, we'll see more of it in the future. Suffering for the people. I stated earlier that this is not generally an easy way. In fact, it involves purposeful, voluntary suffering. Many of you may not be too pleased to hear this. We do not want to, quote-unquote, hurt. We've grown to love our creature comforts. We like being clean and dry and well-fed. We like being warm in the winter and cool in the summer. And we like our shiny cars, our glittery vacations, our neatly trimmed houses, and our pretty clothes and our toys of amusement. There's nothing wrong with any of that. What we forget is that it's not what life is all about. We're here to learn and grow. What I find undeniable is the fact that our Creator has chosen suffering as one of His tools of teaching. We may not like it, but I see it as an undeniable fact of life. In this way, suffering's been accepted as a way of life. In fact, you're given the opportunity to voluntarily suffer to offer yourself to the Creator in your quest to find your way on this road. A pipe carrier or medicine person will sacrifice much of their personal lives for, quote, the good of the people, unquote. A person participating in a vision quest will suffer hunger and thirst for days to gain a sacred vision of their purpose in this life. And a participant in a sacred sweat lodge suffers from heat and physical stresses to seek the guidance for and the health of the people. Generally, this choice of voluntary suffering is as personal an offering as you can make to your Tunkashala. It can be roughly parallel to the same suffering Christ gave to, quote-unquote, save His fellow Jews. It's my personal interpretation and experience that we can either choose to suffer voluntarily or the Creator will choose for us, and often we suffer anyway. The complexity and obvious sensitivity of this issue is presently a bit too complex for me to completely fathom. I do, however, understand and practice the principle. I have, as others have, found fulfillment in it. One of the basic premises for suffering in this way is, quote, for the people, unquote. It's intended that the individual or individuals participating in ceremony not only suffer for themselves, but to take that suffering away from the people. The Sacred Sweat Lodge, Purification Ceremony. Much of the reason for me to put this writing together has been to reach this point. In the discovery of our first Americans' philosophy and spirituality, many people come to know it through the Sweat Lodge. It's also known, as some elders prefer, as the Purification Ceremony and the Sacred Lodge. It's often a focal point of this way, and participation in it is usually never-ending, regardless of your growth along your path. There's been, in recent years, a fairly wide use of the sweat. I'm compelled to say, though, that much of it has not been proper or traditional. I don't wish or need to dwell on the negative, but there have been many people, both Indian and non-Indian, that have used the sweat lodge in a distorted way, often for personal gain. Others have been simply naive in their approach to it. The sweat is a simple thing, and yet it has a depth I've only skimmed in the several years of often intense participation. I've learned a great deal, and yet learned almost nothing. What I found missing in my early years was the foundation of understanding I've laid for you throughout this writing. It was a great struggle for me to alter my thinking to grasp some of these concepts, only a few of which I've briefly mentioned in this text. With any luck, should you choose to participate in ceremony, you'll have at least a foundation of understanding and a better level of respect and patience than I had. One basic premise I was aware of when I first began to sweat was that it was intended to be a quote-unquote cleansing, both spiritual and physical. You may find, as I did, that it does that quite well. With my initial exposure, as I mentioned earlier, I had a high level of intimidation of what I was exposing myself to. Hearing quote-unquote Indian drums and songs, and seeing that I was about to participate in a ceremony that was literally outlawed until 1976 was a bit foreboding. Additionally, the fact that I was white through and through was equally intimidating, since this was something quote-unquote Indian. What I learned right off the bat from the individual that was conducting these sweats was the fact that tradition states that these ceremonies and this way is intended for all people and all nations of mankind. After that, I felt a little better. One of the first and most important elements of a sweat lodge that is critical for you to understand is that it was brought to the people by the white buffalo calf woman for the sake of men. You women may be pleased to hear that it is intended to, quote, bring us guys down a notch, unquote. As we all know, it's generally a male trait to be arrogant and selfish, to be aggressive and demanding, to be domineering and forceful, even violent. There's little in the way of a, quote, natural mechanism, unquote, to calm us down, get us to relax, and unclench our fists. On the Lakota Red Road, there is the sweat. Although I'm not in a position to speak of the various ways a woman might walk this way, I do know that their connection to the Earth Mother and their, quote, natural mechanisms, unquote, are in place. They're natural nurturers with the ability to bring forth life and nourish it. Their connection to the life-giving forces of the Earth Mother is direct. A woman's menstruation period is a powerful time. It is her quote-unquote cleansing and her very real and physical reminder of her humanity. This is why a woman is asked to stay away from the lodge during her quote-unquote moon time. Not because she is quote-unquote unclean, quite the reverse, but due to the fact that this time for a woman is simply too powerful and will conflict with the energy of the sweat. Women are very closely related to the power and energy of our Mother the Earth and reflect that energy in their cycles and in the nature of their lives. Men, on the other hand, have a few problems keeping their feet on the ground. This is the reason for the sacred sweat lodge or purification ceremony. As men, it is our cleansing and a way to keep grounded to our Mother the Earth. Women are so-called blessed with natural processes to help them keep a balanced perspective. We must voluntarily participate in them. When a woman participates in a mixed sweat, she is, quote, lending her strength, unquote, to the men. When the men participate, they are giving themselves for the sake of the Earth Mother and the people, and learning to be humble. The sacred sweat lodge I've come to know consists of a small patch of ground that is cared for and kept safe for the sake of ceremony. It's arranged and outfitted with certain features that are representative of the relationship we and the Earth Mother have with the universe. There are specific details of the construction of the sweat I will not go into here. It's my intent for you to understand the ceremony you might participate in, not recreate it. An area is prepared for a sacred fire. The individual responsible for the lodge will gather a certain number of stones, usually something like granite. The quantity will vary depending on the purpose of the ceremony as well as other factors. Wood is gathered or brought as gifts. It's important that the wood is generally, quote, deadfall, unquote. The traditional perception is that there's plenty of that, and we should not kill our fellow one-leggeds for the sake of ceremony. Slightly to the east of the fire is a small earthen mound prepared as an altar. Usually all nations of the Earth Mother are represented when the altar is assembled for ceremony. A shell for the fishes, a pair of antlers for the four-legged, a feather for the winged, and so on. The lodge itself is placed slightly east of the altar and consists of a small dome-shaped hut. Lodges can also be placed in the west. It's traditionally constructed of willow boughs and buffalo hide, and the flap door faces west and towards the altar. These days the willow branches are usually retained, but the difficulty in attaining buffalo hides are fairly obvious, and modern technology has made it possible to replace the hides with blankets and sheet plastic. Every element of the lodge has relevance: the number of boughs used, their position, the fact that it is round. In fact, the spiritual perception is not that it's a dome, but that it is a sphere and represents the universe. The upper half is representative of the spiritual world, and the lower half mingles with the Earth Mother and is representative of physical life. Some perspectives reverse this. In the center of the lodge is a small pit a foot or two deep. Traditionally, around the pit was usually a carpet of sage, but today it's often just carpet. The sacred fire is assembled in a specific way, with the stones inside and the fires lit. Once the fire is started, the lodge has begun, and the area around the lodge, altar, and fire becomes sacred ground. This is an important perception. Almost the entire focus of the intent of the lodge is to invite spirits traveling across the Milky Way to come and join the ceremony. If the individual responsible for the lodge has prepared it in a sacred manner and in a humble way, if the lodge is constructed with care and respect for tradition, if the altar's arrangement pleases the spirits and the stones and the fire were assembled and lit with prayer and sincerity, they may choose to visit the gathering. The sacred sweat lodge is many things. One of the most dangerous elements of its nature is that it is a door to the spirit world. You should not participate in any lodge or attempt to assemble one yourself without the cooperation and participation of an individual that has had extensive exposure to the tradition. You might even call the sacred sweat lodge ceremony as a, quote, highly complex electromechanical device utilized to cause a crossover of dimensions, unquote. Certainly not a toy for amateurs. Simply put, if nobody knows what they're doing, don't do it. Once the fire is lit, avoid crossing over the line from the fire to the lodge. As the fire burns and the rocks heat, the spirits will visit to see that you have been respectful. They may choose to stay, and they may not. The person responsible for the ceremony should be a pipe carrier and be familiar with all the processes of preparation. Men usually wear all cotton or natural fiber shorts and nothing else. Jewelry can become too hot and is not worn. Women will wear all cotton or natural full-length dresses. Never agree to participate in a sweat where you are told that you will be nude. This is in direct contradiction to tradition. The participants need to keep their thoughts pure, and this is an obvious impediment. You should also never pay for a sweat. The connection of the contemporary concept of money should never in any way be connected to the sacred sweat lodge or any other ceremony. The time prior to the actual lodge ceremony is important. Your personal quote-unquote sweat actually began at the point where you decided to attend. As the participants gather, you should gently and quietly interact and become known to each other. You should get acquainted. Once you're in actual ceremony, you will become part of the sacred circle, and you will need compassion, respect, and understanding for one another. Having a good time, pleasant conversation, even goofing around is not a problem in any way. Just remember that once the fire is lit, you should recognize that you've come to this place to pray and seek healing or guidance from your Creator. As the participants assemble for the lodge, you'll be smudged with, most likely, sacred sage. Allow the smoke to touch your whole body. Turn slowly clockwise as the person with the smudge pot blows it around you. I even lift my feet to get the bottoms. Women enter first and take a position on the south, depending on the pipe carrier. It's not uncommon for them to sit in the north. As the givers of life, and with my understanding of the representation of the South in this way, it's not difficult to comprehend their relevance there. Men enter last and sit in the northern half, but could also sit in the south. It's all dependent on the tradition of the person pouring the water. The sacred lodge is a place for prayer. On entering, remember to say, "All my relations," or "Medakwie Yoyasin." It's a brief prayer of respect for all the concepts and principles of this way and the ceremony you are about to participate in. You're saying this prayer to the people who are there with you, the spirits that join you, and the spirit keeper of the sacred lodge, the spotted eagle, Wanbligleshka. The ceremony will consist of 4 quote-unquote rounds. During each round, the person conducting the lodge will guide you through with songs, stories, and sacred lessons of this way. I've been taught that as the first 7 stones are being brought into the lodge and laid into the pit, you should be silent. Your brothers, the stone people, are entering the lodge, and the first 7 represent the sacred ceremonies as well as the sacred principles I've touched on in this text. The first round is intended to invite the spirits to your gathering. Specific ancient traditional songs such as the Spirit Calling Song are used for this purpose. If you have the opportunity, learn the words to these songs and their meaning. It will help you, quote, become one, unquote, with the ceremony. If you don't be concerned. What you'll need to know will come to you in the time you'll need to know it. The individual conducting the lodge may use the second round for any number of purposes. It's simply up to them for what. Usually the third round is a time for individual prayer, and afterward a sacred pipe is brought in and smoked. Again, this is a time for silence. If you have all done well, if you have been humble, and the spirits are pleased, it's hoped that the smoke you draw in and exhale will go out into the universe with your prayers, good thoughts, and humble needs, and you will be fulfilled. Most of us are familiar with the expression, "What goes around comes around." So were our first Americans. A rudimentary perception is that if you have a good heart, if you share yourself and your strengths, if you are humble, if you conduct yourself in a good way, these things will come back to you. In the last round, although the individual pouring the water may use this time for other things too, the spirit sending song is sung. This sends the spirits that have joined you on their way and thanks them for their help and guidance. As you leave the lodge, be sure to say, "All my relations," and thank the spotted eagle, Wanbligleshka, for keeping the lodge safe for your prayers. Afterwards, you and the other participants will share food and conversation. Be sure to contribute all you can to this mini-feast. And lastly, at one point in time, be sure to thank the person who poured the water for you with a gift. Theirs was a great sacrifice to provide this ancient ceremony, and you should show your gratitude for that sacrifice from your heart. It's up to you how. I've explained the logistical and social processes of the creation and participation in a sweat lodge, but one fundamental question may remain. What value does it all have? Have the spirits seen my life as a total mess as I do and are going to swoop down from the stars and fix it all? Will the sacred pipe see my financial debts and feel sorry for me and magically pay them? The only way I can address these questions is by pointing out the value I have found. It's also a basis I've heard others reflect. The sweat provides you with the opportunity to pause and look at yourself. It provides, no, more than that, it forces you into a process of introspection. One thing I see as undeniable is the fact that we all, as a human characteristic, spend a great deal of time and energy convincing ourselves that, quote, everything is okay, unquote. We know darned well that this is not always true. Everything is not always okay. This is how we get ourselves into trouble. We don't deal with things as they really are. When there is no light, when we can't hear anything except our own voices, when the only thing we can feel is every cell of our body trying to stay cool, when the rest of the world and its ills and woes are almost a distant memory, we only have one other place left, within ourselves. The sweat is many things, but it is mostly a, quote, mechanism, unquote, that makes us pause from the busy work of living and remember where we come from, and, perhaps, makes us think about where we should be going. The Vision Quest. Crying for guidance and healing. Someday I might consider a vision quest. So far, I've only discussed the possibility. It's a fairly serious commitment to yourself as well as others, and should not be entered into lightly. It's also something that you should generally wait to enter until you have some experience in this way of walking, and some understanding of its traditions and philosophy. Your participation should also be based on need. What you feel about your life will have a great bearing on your need to commit to one. If you feel lost and cannot seem to find your way alone, if the direction of your life seems wrong, and if you're disillusioned with life's expectations of you, you may want to consider it. Also, in the reverse, if you're confident in the way in which you're following your path and have come to know your life and your path in a positive way, you may wish to, quote, commune with, unquote, those spiritual entities that have walked it with you. Or you may wish to thank your Tunkashla for help along your way. Whatever your reasoning or need, it's a very personalized ceremony that is available to everyone. Basically, it's intended that you completely separate yourself from your everyday life and humbly approach your Tunkashla and your Creator for guidance or in thanksgiving. Working with a medicine person, pipe carrier, or elder, you spend a period of time preparing for your vision quest. They will be your guide. You'll be preparing to be, quote, put up on the hill, unquote. These preparations will include exposure to the traditions that are most familiar to your guide. They might be sweat lodges, or they might be particular tasks that you need to perform that show you understand and respect these ways. The time it takes to prepare for your vision quest is wholly determined by your guide and your needs. This process may take as long as a year. When you're ready, a place will be prepared for you. The time you choose to take to seek your vision is entirely your choice. It will vary from 1 to 4 days. Basically, the point of it all is for you to have the time and a clear enough mind to, quote-unquote, commune with the spirit world. The actual method used to facilitate this will vary from tradition to tradition, but generally takes place away from the activity of others on a hill in a wooded area. Some older traditions say that you should spend your vision quest in, quote, the womb of the Earth Mother, unquote. This consists of a hole dug into the hillside, covered with natural materials, in which you sit and pray for the time you've chosen. Others might be the use of a cave, or you might simply remain by a fire and pray and contemplate for that time. Or it could take place in a teepee. Use of the sweat lodge is commonplace in this ceremony. When and where is up to your guide, and the sacred pipe is also an integral part. During the time you've chosen, you will fast. This usually includes both food and water, even if you sweat, but sometimes can include just food. You give up all connection to the physical world, except your exposure to tradition and the Earth Mother. What you seek, what you need, what you will find or experience is for no one to say. It's one of the most individuated ceremonies in this tradition. When you, quote, come down off the hill, unquote, your guide will most likely sit with you privately and discuss your experience. They will try and help you understand the event. A note about so-called crying. Throughout the course of this writing, I've discussed humbleness. We creatures tend to puff ourselves up with pride, and let's not even discuss arrogance. Just like suffering in the sweat lodge, this way reminds us that we quote-unquote cry too. As I also mentioned, this way is holistic, with a W, or balanced in its perspective, taking all the elements of creation into account. To ignore any one aspect of the whole is contrary to a clear vision of reality. Crying, the emotional aspect of the human experience, is unavoidable. Ignoring it is simply imbalanced. Western or European cultures rarely recognize this element of life. The Vision Quest is another example of how our first Americans had a realistic approach to the stark truths of living, and not only refused to ignore them, but embraced them in a healthy way. It's also a clear recognition that we aren't alone in our life endeavors, and substantially recognizes powers greater than ourselves in the unfolding of the universe. As I previously stated, I haven't participated in a Vision Quest, although expect to someday. All I know of it I've learned in conversation and discussions with people who have. As in other ceremony of this tradition, your commitment should be sincere. Remember that these activities exist to task you and challenge your resolution to complete them. The Sundance. In the summer of 1990, my family and I were fortunate enough to break away from the drudgery of everyday living and visit the West for 6 weeks, a rare opportunity. We were also fortunate that it coincided with a couple of our friends' participation in the Sundance. One of these friends was the individual responsible for my initial exposure to these ways. I was hardly going to miss the chance to be with him at the Sundance. This was his 3rd of 4 years dancing, and we didn't have the opportunity to be with him for the first 2. The Sundance is the largest and most substantial ceremony of the Lakota and others, and generally takes place in the summer. It can attract whole communities and is a most sacred event. In ancient times, the Sundance occurred all over Turtle Island. There's even a large plot of land here in the east near the Delaware River where there's evidence that the Sundance was performed there. At this point, it's necessary to remind you of some of my earlier cautions. Remember that our first Americans' community can tend to be fragmented as they go through their process of healing. One of the results of this discourse has been the introduction of quote-unquote fringe groups that fall away from a full understanding of tradition. By that, a few years after our Colorado experience, the elders of the Lakota began to call the Sundance back to the reservation areas to help bring things into closer focus. The Lakota sometimes imply that they are the keepers of the sacred ways, as other nations do, which includes the sacred Sundance. It's said that, in ancient times, some Lakota would travel around Turtle Island sharing these ways with others. Others might disagree with the Lakota perception that they are the keepers of the sacred ways, but the Lakota have a few interesting things in their favor. The sweat and derivations of it exist in a great number of other nations' traditions, and the use of the sacred pipe is widespread. Additionally, for generations they've been, quote, responsible for, unquote, a portion of the earth that is literally like no other. Geologists have proven that the stone formations that compose the Black Hills are the oldest on Earth, some 4.5 billion years old. The Black Hills lie in the approximate geological center of the continent, the eldest of the stone people and the oldest part of the Earth Mother. This is highly representative of the sacred tree of life found at the center of the Sundance. Additionally, evidence and tradition of the Sundance and its derivations encircles the continent and is a part of many other nations' traditions, much as the arbor of the Sundance encircles the sacred tree of life, creating a sacred circle. This may, quote, ruffle the feathers, unquote, of some first Americans' egos that are not Lakota, but it is a compelling argument. I won't discuss many of the details of the Sundance ceremony for 3 reasons. First, I've never danced. I'm simply not privy to a great many of the details. Second, it's an event that, should you choose, you should experience personally, whether you dance or not, so that you have first-hand exposure. And lastly, since it is the culmination of all the sacred traditions, you should have a deep, respectful, and sincere understanding of what it is you are participating in, something I cannot provide within these pages. Whatever I may impart to you here is exclusively provided to give you a fundamental understanding for you to establish a basic level of respect for the event. As I mentioned, the Sundance is a community-wide event, and there is a set of principles at stake, some of which I've briefly touched on in this text. The actual quote-unquote dancers are often representatives of groups of people, but they can also be solitary individuals. The dancers train under the tutelage of an elder that is usually a medicine person. The event lasts for 4 days. A place is selected, usually a place where the Sundance has been performed before, and a tall, straight young birch tree is cut and placed in the center of a large circle. Colored ribbons that represent the 4 or 6 directions and the 4 nations decorate the branches. Around the large circle is built an arbor framed by log and topped with conifer boughs. A place is set aside for the dancers that includes teepees, traditionally, for rest and a lodge for sweats. Non-dancers do not generally enter this area. As with your sacrifice in the sacred sweat lodge, the dancers will sacrifice themselves, suffering for their vision and for the people, for 4 days. During that time, they'll have neither food or water, and generally, they will start and finish each day with a sweat. Ropes are tied to the sacred tree of life, one for each dancer. These will be their quote-unquote connection to the sacred tree for the duration of the Sundance. On the first day, the dancers don their Sundance skirts. Yes, the men wear skirts. The concept is, as with women who wear skirts for traditional reasons, to help, quote, gather energy, unquote, from the Earth Mother. Some of their other accoutrements will include their eagle bone whistle and bundles of sacred sage, which they may hold for the entire 4 days. An opening is provided in the arbor to the south. This provides a separate entrance and exit for the dancers at the beginning and end of the day. It is also the way in which spirits that wish to visit and participate the Sundance may enter. Non-dancers do generally not pass in front of this area once the Sundance has begun. There's also an altar set up as the medicine person sees fit within the sacred circle. This is usually arranged much like an altar for a sweat, with representations of all the nations of the earth, and provides a place for the dancers to lay their sacred pipes, unless the medicine person has chosen to have them lay their pipes at the base of the sacred tree of life. When a person chooses to participate in the sacred Sundance, they make a 4-year commitment. It's at this time that they agree to take up the sacred pipe. Once they've picked up the sacred pipe, they have made a commitment for life, but the Sundance expounds upon that. They are to, quote, make themselves available to the people at any time and under any circumstances in which they might be needed, regardless of personal sacrifice. This is a basic principle in the commitment as I've come to understand it. As the dancers gather, so do the people. The arbor has been provided for their comfort during their participation. The commitment of the Sundancers is to suffer for the good of the people. The people come during the dancers' time of suffering and, quote, lend their strength to the dancers. It's a fundamental concept that people outside the arbor remain content, comfortable, and well-fed so as to have a strength of the body and spirit to help the dancers through their ordeal. While the inside of the arbor represents the spirit world, the crying for a vision, and suffering for the health and well-being of the people, the outside represents the bounty, happiness, contentment, and balance we seek in life. It's important that the non-dancing participants outside the sacred circle stay healthy, strong, and without conflict. On the first day, the Sundancers enter the sacred circle within the arbor. In turn, each is pierced with bone on either side of the upper chest. The bones remain for the 4 days of the dance. As the dance begins, each is attached to their rope which is connected to the sacred tree of life, and they remain there dancing from sunrise to sunset for the 4 days. Throughout the course of the day, drummers and singers will accompany the dancers as they circle the sacred tree. Women are usually allowed to dance with the men inside the sacred circle, although they never pierce. Women are already, quote-unquote, attached to the sacred tree of life by their very nature as life-givers. As with the sweat, they dance with the men to, quote, lend their strength, unquote. Outside the sacred circle, the community is feasting and visiting with one another and sharing and gifting each other with their individual offerings. Some of the men, or even some women, might hold their own sweats to pray for the dancers. Throughout the course of the Sundance, the people are encouraged to step within the arbor, often for many hours, and share their good feelings and strength with the dancers, and sing songs with the drummers, and be present to support their brothers, sons, uncles, and friends suffering during the dance. It's important to note that the Sundance is our first Americans' most extreme quote-unquote exercise in the sacred principle of balance. The male dancer's suffering must be in balance with the women's natural state of suffering in the process of giving and nurturing life. The community's well-being must be in balance with the dancer's ordeal. The representation of physical life must be in balance with the spiritual. And all must be done for, quote, the good of the people, unquote. Not just mankind, but all the beings of creation. All of the complex processes of the universe and life are represented in the Sundance, and the hope is that we not only learn the lessons of these representations, but participate in them. It's a test and a challenge to all the people to come together and overcome and understand the suffering we all experience in life. I've experienced no other feeling of serenity, no better sense of purpose, and no more confident sense of quote-unquote community than when I woke up to the sound of the Sundance drums and the singing of the Sundance songs in the Colorado Rockies. I hope that someday, whether through these traditions or any other, you're able to experience the same feeling. End of Part 6.